The far right in Britain isn't just on the march, it's taking violent, murderous action. A neo-Nazi group called National Action applauded the murder and the murderer of a young woman member of the British Parliament.
Just before 1 o'clock today, Joe Cox, MP for Batley and Spenborough, was attacked in Market Street, Bristol. I am now very sad to have to report that she has died as a result of her injuries.
Other alleged members are charged with planning the brutal killing of another woman MP. And 2 British soldiers, said to be from the same Nazi group, face serious terrorism charges. Fascism and far-right extremism, street violence and confrontation isn't new in Britain. It dates back to at least the 1930s, when Oswald Mosley's Blackshirts strutted through major cities. Today's incarnations are no less deadly. This is the story of how it began, how it developed, revealing the major players and exposing the secret past of the leader of the latest mass street movement. Last year, the young woman Labour MP Jo Cox was cruelly murdered in the course of her public duties in Birstall, West Yorkshire. The mother of 2 young children was stabbed and shot to death by a man called Thomas Mair, whose name needn't detain us for long. At the time, the mainstream media narrative was that Mair was a lone wolf. Well, a rabid wolf he surely was, but he was not alone. Thomas Mair was connected, enmeshed in the complex web of British fascism.
National Socialists, we will rise once more. We will finally win back our lands and win back our continent, and then our rights will forever be free. Hail victory!
In a way, the blood and horror of the Jo Cox murder brought British fascism full circle, back to where, in a sense, it all began. Sir Oswald Mosley was a middle-level British aristocrat who married up to the daughter of the Viceroy of India, Lord Curzon.
Sooner or later, in the lives of great nations, comes the moment of decision, comes the moment of destiny.
He was a Conservative MP, then a Labour MP, a left-wing Labour MP, sometimes talked of as a future Labour Prime Minister. But as the skies darkened, the Wall Street crash occurred, and widespread mass poverty, Oswald Mosley turned to fascism.
There's been a 50-year dispute over what fascism actually is. One of the most influential definitions was by Roger Griffin, who argued that it was a palingenetic form of ultranationalism, and that's a fancy way essentially of saying it's a cross-class revolutionary brand of nationalism that believes in the renewal of the nation and a new man. And in a way, that's what people argued separated fascism from conservatism. The conservatives looked back at the status quo, whereas fascists were very much about looking forward at creating this ethnically pure new man.
You can see a sense of victimhood that somehow the nation state, with which they identify, has been somehow a victim of others, of evil forces. Stabbed in the back, undermined in various ways, whether it's by the international Jewish conspiracy, or by communism, or by liberals who are responsible for the degeneration and the decadence.
The one thing that seems to me to bring together all fascists is the belief in an absolute leader whose word is law and who cannot be wrong. And certainly Hitler thought he could not be wrong. In this country, Oswald Mosley thought he could not be wrong, which is as good a definition of madness as I know, but also the only definition that I can see of fascism.
Here in Cable Street in the East End of London, On the 4th of October 1936, Britain's first fascist leader came a cropper. Sir Oswald Mosley was the leader of the British Union of Fascists. He would have been, if he could have been, Britain's Adolf Hitler. The purpose of his march was to whip up hatred in much the same way as his idol did in Germany. The people of the East End, indeed people from all over London, came en masse to oppose him. 250,000 Londoners stood here in Cable Street proclaiming, "No passaran, they shall not pass." And when Mosley and his black-shirted, jack-booted Nazis came a-marching, the people stood firm. There was trouble, all right, but the fascists were routed and had to call off their march. Racial tension was already simmering here in the long, hot summer of 1958. Here on Friday, August the 29th, outside Latimer Road Underground Station, the spark was lit. 3 days of what infamously became known as the Notting Hill race riots. Over that long weekend, hundreds of white youth rampaged around this area, carrying weapons, brandishing racist slogans. The Daily Mail, in its inimitable style, joined in, asking, should we let them keep coming in? Today, Notting Hill is expensive, one of Britain's most exclusive enclaves. Here, the rich, the famous, and the fashionable live, eat, and shop. At the time of the Notting Hill race riots, it couldn't have been more different. This area was one of grimy, crumbling tenements, owned by slum landlords, charging racked rents. Kelso Cochrane, the young Antiguan carpenter who was stabbed to death right here in Goulburn Road in Notting Hill, was obviously not Britain's first victim of racially motivated murder, but he was the first to attract national attention. The first to become, though he would never know it, a symbol of resistance to race hate. At the time, Notting Hill was a hotbed of white nationalism. Oswald Mosley's Union movement and Colin Jordan's White Defence League had this place seething with racial tension.
We feel that you cannot have coloured immigration on the scale in which you're having it today without sooner or later having mass interbreeding. That must lead ultimately to a mulatto Britain. We feel that if we have a mulatto population in the future, that must mean the downfall of the civilization and culture of our country, which we hold so dear.
If you look at the early history of fascism, it was completely different to what we today associate as being fascist. Oswald Mosley was himself from the establishment, was from the Labour Party, had connections across the elite, if you like. He also had fairly developed ideas about what he wanted to do with the state and the economy. Contrast that to, say, the National Front in the 70s or the British National Party in the early 2000s. Those later organisations were very crude, were simply outwardly racist, were conspiratorial, anti-Semitic, but they didn't have that a deeper level of thought about how to reorganise the state and the economy. And so really a lot of the far right in Britain in the post-war period really became dominated by white supremacism, by crude neo-Nazism, and really since then hasn't escaped that legacy.
In 15 or 20 years' time, the black man will have the whip hand over the white man.
In the late 1960s, Enoch Powell, a Conservative Party grandee, made a now notorious speech. He said, like the Roman, he could see the Tiber foaming with much blood. It was a prediction of a Britain riven by race riots, even racial war. It caused the disparate strands of Britain's far right to rapidly coalesce. The vehicle they founded was called the National Front. The NF had a joint leadership: the thinker and orator John Tyndall and the Iron Man of action Martin Webster.
I don't believe that the British people will allow themselves to be mongrelized out of existence. We've got to fight to... Listen, if it's right to save the whale, which all of the lefties, who are otherwise waving anti-Nazi League banners, saying, if it's right to save the whale, why shouldn't the British survive? Why have we got to submit to being exterminated by race mixing while we protect the survival of the minke whale or the blue whale or whatever? The logic of the left just doesn't bear scrutiny.
The National Front brought chaos to the streets of Britain in the 70s and 80s, and it struck terror in black and Asian communities, anyone whose skin was not white.
The NF had a symbolism, had a reputation that really struck fear into the hearts of many in our black communities. And to take a beating from National Front skinheads was to face the most horrendous violence, vicious violence, retributive violence that black people could face. And you could literally lose your life over it, and Kelson Cochrane did just that.
The NF was a coalition of small extreme right-wing groups on the fringes of British politics. It specialised in provocative marches in immigrant areas. Only whites were allowed to join. Britain is now, whether you like it or not, I happen to like it, a multiracial country. But even if you don't like it, it's too late to do anything about that, isn't it?
Well, first, I don't agree that it's a multiracial country. Integration hasn't taken place to a significant extent. And it's for this reason, I don't know whether you've noticed, but on television advertisements over the last year or so, every single advertisement involving people has got black people in it, Asian people in it, as well as whites. And particularly, insidiously in my view, they're showing, including in furniture and bedding advertisements, black and white couples. We are insidiously being got at. They're hoping that nature will follow art, and that if they create an illusion of an actuality of integration and race mixing and miscegenation, that's how the public will follow it. Well, the Brexit vote has indicated that they're not.
The National Front tried to give itself a democratic veneer, standing in local and national elections, without success.
It's part of the overwhelming rage and anger felt by many black and Muslim communities that they were British citizens in a first-class democracy, living third-class lives and being subject to the most horrendous violence.
I get the impression that black people are deeply unhappy here, and that their kids are murdering each other at a frightful rate here. They're not settling in, they're not happy, and I think people are unhappy outside their own culture, their own society. It's not making happiness for us either.
The NF had a clear message about how to solve what it saw as the race question.
If there were a sensible government, all illegal immigrants, all of them, would be sent back to their countries of origin. They're here illegally, they're committing criminal acts, taking our money, using our health service, bleeding us. They would be sent back straight away.
But you're still talking about illegals, or are you having
I'm now saying that we would, in the words, was it The Godfather? We would make these people here who are not happy an offer they can't refuse.
But you wouldn't rule out forcible repatriation?
If push comes to shove, at the very end of the day, no. But I don't think it need come to that.
You see, I have 4 mixed-race children, so you can understand I'm twitching at this. They've never seen the place that you would first encourage but not rule out, forcibly sending them back.
Maybe you liked. Maybe I take it. I don't know what ethnic background you're.
I have 2 Arab children and 2 Indonesian children.
Blimey, of your own procreation.
Yes.
I didn't know that. Well, I still have to say, without wishing to be rude to you or your children or your wife or wives, I don't know anything about your background, but I still put the survival of the British people first. That's what being a nationalist is. I put that first, and I'm not going to be morally intimidated or morally blackmailed by exceptional hard cases.
We saw their affinity with genuine fascism in terms of their idolization of Hitler, their Sieg Heil salutes, and they were terrifying, for me at least, and where we lived, we were terrified of actually getting caught out by the National Front, such was their path.
How do you view Hitler?
I think he was a great man for his people. I think that a lot of the things he did for his people, picking Germany out of the dump that it had been thrown, firstly by the Versailles Treaty, and secondly by financial corruption and political decadence within his country. I think the Hitler that led to him taking power and cleaning up his country and raising German self-respect, that was an era which I would have supported him in.
But what about, for example, the Holocaust?
I'm not in the company of the Holocaust revisionists. I do think the promulgators of the Holocaust narrative have got a lot of very serious questions to answer. Engineers, scientists of various disciplines have subjected many of the stories associated with the Holocaust to critical examination and have compiled a list of questions about how this could have happened, or that could have happened, and these questions are not allowed to be asked in polite society in this country. And in Germany, you go to prison for just asking these questions. But I don't say that there weren't brutal acts perpetrated against Poles, against Jews, against Russians and others, but I have yet to be persuaded that Germany had set up the machinery for the factory-like mass production destruction of an entire race.
The NF, like far-right groups before them, fell apart, out of the wreckage of which emerged the BNP, led by former NF headman Nick Griffin. The BNP devoted their resources to persuading the British public to back them at the ballot box.
Our vote increased from 808,000 to 943,000.
They had some success, but the public eventually saw through them and rejected them, just as they had Oswald Mosley's fascists at Cable Street in the 1930s, and in similar fashion. Football crowds are an obvious breeding ground in which the far right can recruit. They are the only regular convocations of white working class youth who gather in their tens of thousands every other Saturday. The first attempt to harness the energy of those crowds to Britain's far right ideas was mounted by a man called Stephen Lennon, though you probably know him better as Tommy Robinson.
Every single city that has an Islamic community, they are raping, pimping and abusing our youth.
A bit of a hoaxer a bit of a huckster, Lenin started the English Defence League, and for a brief period they were alive and kicking.
No surrender to the Taliban! Scum!
Islam is coming to get you. It's going to kill as many people as it can. It will slit your throat like you are a cow on the street, and it looks on you like that.
It has brought tears to my eyes reading what these girls have gone through. The reason why these men rape these children, it could be because they are perverted criminals, but it could be because they are following this manual. It could be. So when will the police, when will the politicians realise the link between this and them men that are raping our kids?
The English Defence League were challenged wherever they appeared, and it was the British police who absorbed the brunt of the aggro. Mike Yardley is an ex-army man, and it shows. He's a security and intelligence expert.
What is their agenda? They're racist, they're Islamophobic, they're homophobic, they're anti-Semitic.
Only one Mohammed! There's only one Mohammed! Where the black is white and Jesus son, Mohammed is
I think there is a very significant threat. I think it's a growing threat. I see these organisations, which are usually splintered, which reform, which take different names, NS131, for example, Scottish Dawn.
UK has pledged to take in 20,000 refugees. They are not welcome in Britain, they are not welcome in England, and they are sure as hell not welcome in Scotland. Send them back!
When the organisations are beginning to develop a potential which you see as terroristic, but seriously dangerous, then I think you don't have any choice. You have to take that sort of action, even though you know that the groups will then disperse, the people in the groups will disperse, they'll probably create new organisations. Nevertheless, you're disrupting them. And so that there is a benefit, there's an immediate benefit to that disruption.
Well, we say no!
In the wake of the murder of Joe Cox, the UK government used anti-terror laws to crack down and ban these fascist groups.
National Action will become the first ever extreme right-wing group in the country to be proscribed. National Action is a vile group. They promote homophobia, they promote violence and terrorism, and they have no place in this country.
A number of alleged members of National Action are now facing trial on serious charges. 2 of them are soldiers in the British Army. For legal reasons, we can't go further into their case at this point in time, but one thing is obvious, that the British government fears danger from Britain's far right.
What is interesting, though, is the media attention that the Islamic radicals have had, but to date, they haven't really devoted anything like the same media resource to exploring this phenomena.
We want our country back! We want our country back! We want our country back!
There's a new outfit in town, the Football Lads Alliance, founded by a convicted football hooligan banned from every football ground in the country and regularly courting right-wing extremists as speakers. The FLA has mounted 2 huge demonstrations in London. Thousands took to the streets to back them. Others turned out to protest that the FLA weren't all that they claimed to be.
On that demonstration, as we were trying to leaflet, that's all we were trying to do, leaflet the march. People were racially abused, people were threatened, nurses were told, quotes, "I hope they effing bomb you," right? This is not a non-violent group.
Look, we're against all extremism, no matter what the press say, far left, far right, we're just normal people who want change. Simple as that.
they're saying they're just football lads. Well, come on, they're formed by a football hooligan.
Well, it's all about, at the end of the day, look, we've got to make it clear. It's saying about violence, there are other ways to cause destruction. Push the government to act before it's too late. We live in a world of democracy and freedom of speech. That's needed more than ever now, and the FLA can provide that platform. They're taking great pains to say we're anti-racist and so on, but how come there wasn't a Muslim speaker on the platform? The truth is, a lot of the people following the FLA hate Islam. Not just Islamist terror, as they call it, they hate Islam. For supposedly anti-extreme, a group that's against terror, you've got people who are linked to terror acts, you've got people who are known racists and fascists. There's a man called Portinari, who was a former London UDA commander and a convicted gun runner for the UDA, who was a member of the FLA.
One of our aims was to not have no flags on our march. We've really promoted the non-racism approach, the non-violent approach. It's all about peaceful protest.
Former hooligan John Megan tries to say he's against all extremism, but he and Tommy Robinson, seen here in Bristol on an ADL jaunt, are just the latest heirs to Mosley's black shirts.